The motor force applies a rotational force to the particles under its effect. It offers a range of other controls beyond this that make it a very flexible tool. Its main features are that you can actually define a spherical maximum range for it. You can define a maximum rotational force that it will try and match, but not exceed. And you can also pulse the force with two separate pulse waves. Let's have a look at its parameters. As you can see, we have the parameters over here. First we have the timing group, and as with some of the other forces, the motor sports a timing group which allows you to define its period of activity. As you can see, we've got an on time and an off time, as you can see here, and it'll only be active between those two time periods. Then we have the strength control group, which you can see here. And in this group you can define the basic strength of the force, a target speed for it to meet, and a gain value that defines the accuracy of the feedback system. Here you can see basic torque, and this is a force which is applied to the particles and will make them rotate around the icon's central axis. The value can be a positive or negative value, and whilst positive the particles swirl in a counterclockwise direction. Below here you can see the NM, LB foot and LB inch values. These are used to tailor the torque force to real-world values, and you can use these radio buttons to define the torque as newtons, meters, pounds per foot, or pounds per inch. As you're using the force with particles, this has very little meaning, so you can safely leave it on the default option. The next option, which you can see, is a toggle, feedback on or off. And whilst feedback is on, the force will apply itself proportionately in comparison to the target rotational speed. So, as a particle approaches the speed, the torque force is reduced, and on matching the speed, the force is dropped to near zero. This option is useful when you want to avoid your particles gaining too much speed. It's basically like a throttle, and when the force actually realizes that it's achieved the speed that you've defined, it drops the throttle down to basically zero. And if it finds the particle speed dropping, it'll actually increase the throttle a little bit to actually keep that speed up. Reversible, which you can see is the tick box below it, this allows the following target revs value to be a negative value. When this checkbox is not ticked, any negative target revs value is actually treated just as zero. Then you have the target rev spinner, which you can see below, and here it is. And this is the target speed for the feedback system to actually match. So what you basically have is you have a basic torque, which is a strength, which is applied to the particles, and this is a kind of the grunt of the motor. And then you have a target revs, that's how many revolutions you actually want to try and meet. And you can choose to actually have feedback on, and when it meets that target revolution speed, the torque will be dropped to basically not actually speed the particles up beyond that revolutionary rate. Then we have these three measurement systems here, and they are revs per hour, which is obviously very slow, revs per minute, which is obviously quite a bit faster, and revs per second, which is obviously a very fast setting. You can use these as basically multipliers to the value that you've actually set here. So obviously if you've set 1, it'll be 1 revolution per second, or 1 revolution per minute, or 1 revolution per hour. So basically you can choose whichever setting gives you the kind of target revs speed that you prefer to work with. Below that you actually have a gain value, and this is used for defining just how much grunt is used to actually meet the target revs value. With a low gain value, the target rev value will tend to be overshot, and the actual value will fluctuate around it. With a higher gain value, the speed will be matched much more quickly, and the speed will be adhered to much more closely. So if you want a kind of loose matching of the actual target rev speed, then use a low gain value. If you wanted to reach that speed and hit it and stick at that value, use a high gain value. Then in the group below, we have another group of parameters, which allow us to set up two separate pulses in the actual speed of our particles rotation. You can see you've got two separate pulses, and you can see that these can be made to make your force grow and fade over a defined period. I'll only define the parameters for the first pulse, as they're actually repeated in pulse 2. First we have an enable tick box, and this enables the first variation value, which you can actually see here. The period 1 value can define the period during which the pulse will actually go through its full cycle, from maximum to minimum, and this would be measured in frames. Then you have amplitude 1, And this parameter allows you to define the maximum variation in the force. This will be from 100% down to the value you pick, i.e. if you use a value of 25%, the force will fluctuate between 100% and 75%. So you can actually enter a value there. The phase 1 is used to offset the cycle in time, so you can actually get it to match up with any particular effect that you want to match. This is just a timing value, so you can actually just use it to, as I said, offset the actual pulse in time to get it to work in the point that you want to. Then you have period 2, amplitude 2, and phase 2. And as I said, those are actually just duplicates of period 1, amplitude 1, and phase 1. And you can use those to actually add another pulse on top. Finally, we have the particle effect range. And here you can enable a spherical gizmo for the actual maximum range of your force. And when you've enabled it, obviously the range parameter here actually becomes available, and you can actually set up that range here. So let's quickly have a look at what this actual force applies to our particles. It's a motor, and it will actually rotate our particles around a central axis. So that's pretty easy to understand. So there you go. As you can see, it actually rotates our particles, and almost immediately they go flying off into space. What you'd actually need to keep your particles in position is a counteracting gravity force to actually pull your particles inwards as well. And as I said, a really good partner for the motor force would be the particle bomb set to a very large effect range, so it doesn't actually cut on or come on very quickly and cause the particles to explode, but instead is applied constantly. And you can use that particle bomb set to cylindrical to actually pull your particles back in towards the central axis, and that will actually counteract the centrifugal forces applied to the particles by this motor force here. If we turn on particle effect range and actually bring that in a little bit smaller, you'll find now if we press play, let's just go back to the beginning, we press play, and as you can see now it has a much smaller area of effect based on that range that we've just set up there. Okay, so that's the motor force, and as you can see it's very specialized, just used for producing rotation on our particles, but you can see it's actually quite flexible, and it's actually more flexible than the parameters which are actually similar to it in the vortex. So you can see that you've actually got more control over rotational speed using the motor. Okay, let's move on now and have a look at the next force, the push force.